In one of my earlier Ree Guadalupe presentations here on YouTube, I asked Jeff Rense, actually advised Jeff Rense, to insist on a fine for what went on, especially on July 3rd, 2012. And I haven't heard anything yet. Nor have I heard David, who is still legally under contract and doesn't want to sign off the contract, and who proves he's still on the contract every now and then whenever I ask him to do so. Or should I play with Marcy on the internet, he becomes completely lucid for about an hour outside of his ad for Mein Kampf jumpsuit that he's been thrown into ever since he was locked out of the Shrine of the Infant of Prague illegally. Now, because they can lock him out of the Czech Republic, but they can't lock him out of the Shrine. Now, which he, and I'd like to remind people that the whole time he was getting his PhD, he kept the Infant of Prague prominently on his website while he was studying. So locking him out of the Shrine of the Infant of Prague was a real bozo thing to do, and no government can do that. He's entitled to at least a day pass. The same thing if someone had a devotion to Guadalupe and is persona non grata in Mexico. If that person wants a day pass and is willing to pay for a guard to take them in and out, the government cannot say no. I mean, there are special places that, they just can't lock you out. Oh, like civil government has nothing to do with it. Okay, now, what I want to do now is explain to these two what went on that makes this so... Now, I'm still going to try to be as brief as possible, but the point is that David on July 3rd spent the whole program trying to give Americans guilt trips for winning the Second World War, focusing primarily on the bombing of Dresden, while Bob Dylan was in concert at Dresden that same day. Now, I do not believe that David or his guest had any idea Bob Dylan was in Dresden that day, even though Dylan's schedule is published like a year in advance. And I've never seen anything like it in my life. What I did about it was I turned on a rock song while I kept the radio show on, and I called a senator, and I had him be a witness to the fact that every now and then I would put the phone in my computer, and you could not make out one word of the radio show because I was drowning it out with rock music. And I wanted to keep doing that all day long, somehow, somewhere, everywhere, until I was sure Dylan was done with the concert, because I had no idea when it would start or end. But I kept on, even after the broadcast was finished, I kept on showing it off and tracking wherever wherever I felt it was appropriate, I would do it. Well, you see, the senator and I agreed immediately after the broadcast was over that what should happen is that the FCC should fine the Rense radio network, not excessively, but just some. Look, it happens to be July 3rd. If that same program was done on any other day, fine. But it's the 3rd of July, and in addition, there's an American in concert in Dresden. And it's not right to just let it slide. And I know that senator agreed with me that the FCC should have immediately fined the Rense radio network that day, that same day. Now, Now, I was on the phone with the senator. And this kind of senator gets his mail immediately. I had it all in his voicemail. So I went off. I still wanted to track what could make it happen. Because I know that if David told his guest, hey, guess who's in Dresden today? While we're going to do this. I think she would have said, why don't we pick another day? I don't think she would have won. And I don't think David had any idea Dylan was in Dresden, because David doesn't do things like that. He's still under contract with me, so on some basic level, I mean, he's not a total Daniel 7 beast just because he's in the costume. So I told everybody about it all day long, Eastern Standard Time. And then, when I was pretty sure Dylan was in concert, I told a retiree from the United States Air Force by email, to take these 2 rock songs and just pass them right on to Myers to give the psychotic twice as big of a headache. Do not answer. The email title said, do not reply. Dylan is still in concert in Dresden. Just pass this on to Myers. And in there were 2 links to 2 songs to give the psychotic twice as big of a headache. Signed, J.K. Ask New York Bar. And instead of doing that, the retiree on pension just like Myers immediately tries to reply just by taking the Ask New York Bar and putting it in his title, at which point I called the senator right back and I said Myers is on AIM. And they think I'm going to open this. If I want to talk to a tennis racket, I'll buy a tennis racket. I'm deleting it with you on voicemail. Then I called everybody and told them about that too. And by the time I was finished with all that, I was sure the concert was over in Dresden. But the next day, when I hoped that someone had found Rense Radio, it appears they did not. And what happened the next day was something that, again, Myers. Look, the submarine, the children kicked that submarine, that must-kill Shaka submarine that the Vatican stole from Reagan all the way to Guam on Night Giuliani Day. Someone convinced this president, without telling him how it got to Guam, to move it to Pearl Harbor. And I immediately was pretty upset when I heard about it. Well, the next day, with the submarine at Pearl Harbor and nobody finding Rense Radio, 3 children died in a freak boating accident in Oyster Bay, New York. And no matter what the FBI tries to sell to whom about it, it certainly was the kind of accident that I'm sure would not have happened if someone had found Rense Radio for what went on the day before. There is no question about it. The FBI tries to tell New Yorkers that the boat was overcapacitated. This boat, with all people on it, left dock, went right out into the middle of Oyster Bay among a bunch of other boats, just standing still. And it felt safe enough for 3 kids to go to sleep in the cabin. And nobody even had any sense of any danger at all, because capacity has something to do with, whether you're moving, deep-sea fishing and stuff like that. Well, and to top it all off, the report was that it seemed that lightning struck the water, and the boat started to spin around, and people actually jumped off because there were boats right next, right there. And so it was whatever the capacity was when it left the shore. That was all those people weren't still on there when it went down. And still the FBI doesn't want to admit that it was just an unexplainable event. It is just outrageous that they tried to put a cause on it that cannot be true. These capacity ratings have to take into account stuff like rough seas when you're deep sea fishing and all. This boat was standing still in a harbor like glass. And I don't care what the FBI says. The closest relevant thing to it was that robber submarine was at Pearl Harbor while this happened at Oyster Bay. And because that robber submarine has more to do with Myers than it could have to do with anyone else, and no one find Rense radio from the day before, this is what I mean. Look, and I just insist that Jeff Rense pay attention to this. It won't be a hefty fine, but you should, this guy killed 3 kids. And not being fined for letting somehow these squads of whomever from wherever get Duke to run that radio show on July 3rd. It wasn't something in David's own head that did it. And it's supposed to be the Rense Radio Network. So if you want to stay in charge of your own steering wheel, you should insist on a fine. Even though they already killed 3 children. It'll only get better for you and for people who care if you'd insist on a fine rather than let them just get away with it. Because these guys they don't have much choice about stuff. David's wearing the costume, but they're the ones that are ruled by the machine. If you insist on a fine and take the fine and pay it, they're the ones that are going to be, totally bonkers as to what to do. If you don't, they make it look like it's your fault too. And then they might try to take the steering wheel away from you again and again and again.